What's up guys, the Strong Boys 19 here. Today is going to be the last album review for another 2020 album, and as you see I'm going to be reviewing the latest album from Sir Paul McCartney, entitled McCartney 3. This is the follow-up to his 2018 album of Egypt Station. Legendary singer-songwriter, producer, collaborator, we know him, we all love him. He's been making music for almost 60 years in his point in his career, even releasing some of the most critically acclaimed and essential albums of all time, from his path on the Beatles to his stuff with Wings, and released now almost 20 albums as a solo artist. So I was really surprised that McCartney has decided to come back and release a new album during the state on the world's COVID-19 pandemic. And this album has been released as well as a sequel to McCartney 2 that was released 40 years prior to this, which was a very robotic and synthesizer-driven electronic pop sounding album with weirder experimentalisms, and that album being the follow-up to McCartney 10 years after McCartney 1, which is one of my favourite albums of all time. I love how very raw and lo-fi it sounded, but does contain some of the greatest McCartney songs of all time, and it is one of my favourite Beatles solo albums overall. This is another album that was entirely composed and produced by McCartney himself without any involvement of other musicians. And I think to listen to McCartney's new album during this time is definitely worth of something very warm and as very positively comforting to think about this state of this whole thing of music. And I think with McCartney 3, this is for me like a very revised and reflective path, as there are materials to this album that make me wonder about the Beatles albums or to something from a Paul McCartney solo album previously. And I really like the biggest amount of charm and the positivity that this album delivers. And you can hear that immediately. There is a lot of these fun and joy amounts of optimism that McCartney had a lovely time with on making this record. The first track on the album, Long-Tailed Winterbird, is a very great opening number. Hearing the opening guitar pieces acoustically, then to hear the connecting parts of the really ragged crunch electric guitars, and then the drums to build up the anticipation, and hearing the toot-sounding brief vocals from McCartney. This is a mainly instrumental number, and it strangely makes me think and wonder of a number from the Beatles' White Album, and what could start the album off strongly than that brilliant piece of music of this number. And then following that onto the next track, Find My Way, which is in my opinion a wonderful number. It's personally one of the favourites, if not my favourite on this album. It does deliver very strongly with its upbeat, catchy hooks and an instantly intriguing delivery sense of its own, and especially onto the beat that's so engaging and very rhythmic too, especially onto the melodies on Paul's voice. And there are moments on this album that Paul expresses some more onto his range, like on the ballad on the album, Women and Wives, the only heavily piano-driven number on the album, very consistently. And I really like the sound of this track. It's something very melancholic, and I like that Paul still really finds some comfortability into his range, especially onto really trying to get into the falsetto notes, especially on another number that I did like on the tracks of The Kiss of Venus, which is a really nice track, a wonderful set of melody on his singing, and this track alone takes me into a number from the first McCartney solo album, and I like its overall laid back soft, cozy feeling for me. And I think that other tracks of the album, like Seize the Day, is one of the tracks that stands on itself on a really great chord progression. And like Find My Way, this is excellent onto the upbeat feel on the number. This one reminds me on a number from an Abbey Road Beatles album, for example. I think that some of the other tracks are really confident, and that's what I like a lot. Pretty much actually the most onto this album. Almost every track on the record powers themselves with a strong amount of the memorable stuff and the deliveries. There are some weaknesses on the album that I had found. I'm not a fan of the track of Deep Deep Feeling, which being the longest at almost 8.5 minutes. It is a track musically where it does go through various ranges of noises and effects, and again, like on Women and Wives, it's like a very somber and a different feel. But the biggest problem with it, it's very repetitive and it does get meandering. Personally, my least favourite on the album, on another track that I don't think is, that perfect, but it's decent, was Deep Down, which does accompany McCartney on the heavily synthesizer noises packed of this instrumentation. Deep Down was not bad of a number, but I feel that with the other ones that I really enjoyed, Deep Down, like Deep Deep Feeling, doesn't really fulfill me enough. The idea of the track on Winterbirds / When Winter Comes is a very good idea. I like hearing the small seconds of the reprise from Long-Tailed Winterbird and then switching it to the track of When Winter Comes, which was an actual recorded years earlier track, and I think this is a beautiful number. It definitely presents the younger self of McCartney at personally one of his most sweetest and gorgeous melodies on his vocals. And it's a lovely acoustic, folky environment kind of number to finalize and conclude the entirety of this album. There is not really that much of a great amount of ability that is like top perfection, but I think that McCartney 3 is one of the most accessible and personally the best albums in his material as a solo artist since maybe one of his albums from the 2000s, like Chaos and Creation in the Backyard, for example. And obviously with the comments about McCartney's voice, I never really had been finding myself in a difficult position of hearing McCartney's voice in a very indifferent way, as some people say. Personally, that's just the way his state of his voice sounds, and I don't really have an issue with his voice. There were moments that I thought his voice on the falsettos can be a little off-key and out of tune, but I think his voice onto this sound of the album is comforting enough and as really suitable, especially when the man is very aged, of a progressing artist for a long, long time as a musician himself. And I know that there are other musicians that have aged voices like Bob Dylan and Johnny Cash for those examples, but I think McCartney's voice on here was pretty sweet, and I just like the overall warmth of the man's tone. Not really as triumphant and as glorifying as it used to be, but that's really the way it is, and you have to respect that about him, and you have to get used to it, for that matter. All in all, McCartney 3 by Paul McCartney is a really good album from start to finish for almost 45 minutes, and I think that this album is a better, great send-off to really think about something positive and as intriguing of music to take our minds into a feeling during this difficult time in the new year. And that's the same with, some other albums that really finalizes things in reactions to make music take you into a better place. And that's what I think about McCartney 3. With all these words being said, I'm going to give this album an 8.5 out of 10. So I am curious to know what you think of this album in the comments down below. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll keep you guys posted for more videos in the near future.